Good afternoon, everybody. This is Bonnie Vandermeulen, Training Coordinator for Wisconsin Facets. On behalf of our entire Wisconsin Facets staff, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Today, our webinar is entitled Accessible Educational Materials. Federal and state law require schools to ensure that students are able to access the general education curriculum. Since not all students can access the curriculum through the printed page, schools must provide viable alternatives. These alternatives are called Accessible Educational Materials, or AEM. This webinar will describe these alternatives to the printed page. What are AEMs? Who benefits from them? Who makes the decisions about the need for AEM? And how are decisions made on the use of the AEM? What are and where are available AEM resources? This presentation will conclude with parent-specific information. Our presenter today is Nissan Barlev, who is the CSIS 7 Director of Special Education, and for 20 years has been one of 3 partners who administer the Wisconsin Special Education Mediation System. Nissan co-chairs the Special Projects Committee for Wisconsin CAS, chairs the State Superintendent's Blind and Visual Impairment Education Council, serves on the Governor's Autism Council, works on DHS's Children's Long-Term Support Council, the SAA Assessment Team, the Wisconsin RTI and PBIS Advisory Council, and the National IDEA Partnership Creating Agreement Team. He is the former president of the Autism Society of Wisconsin. It is my pleasure today to introduce to you Nissan Barlev. Nissan?
Thank you, Bonnie, and good afternoon, everyone. So what are accessible educational materials? As Bonnie mentioned before, some students have difficulties accessing, meaning recognizing, understanding, or seeing the printed material in the same way their peer can. For example, a student with a specific learning disability in reading might not be able to read the words as they appear on paper, or a student with perceptual or visual difficulties might not be able to see or recognize the print in a book, or a student with physical impairment might not be able to turn the pages in a textbook. So accessible educational materials are designed to address these issues and provide these students with access to the classroom instruction. Accessible educational materials, or sometimes referred to accessible instructional material, and that is specifically for printed material. So these are used interchangeably, and we'll see in the next slide, there is a video that will describe a little bit in visual mode the AEM or AIM. So we'll start the video right now. It's only about a 3-4 minutes video.
Reading is something most of us do every day. We read for pleasure, to get information, to do our assignments, and we read at work to do our jobs. Text is all around us, and we use it every day to help us navigate our way through the world. But when a disability makes it difficult to access text, we may need a little help. Fortunately, help is available. Welcome to Understanding Accessible Instructional Materials, inspired by commoncraft.com. Sometimes children have disabilities that prevent them from accessing print in the same way their peers can. Someone with a visual impairment might not be able to see the print in a book. A person with a physical impairment might not be able to turn the pages of a book or be in a good position to read. And someone with a reading disability like dyslexia might not be able to figure out what the words really mean. To succeed in school, these students need learning materials presented in a way that works for them. We're going to talk about 2 parts of AIM, the content and a way to interact with the content. First, let's talk about the content. These types of learning materials are called Accessible Instructional Materials, or AIM. If elementary and secondary students with disabilities need AIM, then schools are required to provide these in a timely manner. If you think your child needs accessible instructional materials, bring it up with your IEP team. You and the other members of the IEP team determine if a student needs to receive the same content as other children in one or more specialized formats. There are 4 different specialized formats available: Braille, large print, audio, and digital text. The right formats are chosen based on how a student will access the information contained in printed materials, which format lets them work as independently as possible, which format will help the student, and which format will let them successfully participate and make progress in general education curriculum and on IEP goals. You have some information about the content. Now let's talk about ways to interact with the content. The IEP team determines what else is needed. It could be technology, such as a digital audio player, training for students, family, and school staff, accommodations, such as a quiet place to listen to audio files, or specialized instruction to learn how to use audio, Braille, or other formats, coordinated services between teachers, physical therapists, occupational therapists, and others, or support services to maintain equipment and support the use of technology. So now you know a little more about accessible instructional materials, but you may have some specific questions about AIM. There are many resources available to help you learn more. These include Accessible Instructional Materials, AIM, Basics for Families. Accessible Instructional Materials, AIM, a technical guide for families and advocates. The AIM Navigator, a free online tool to help teams make decisions about a student's need for AIM and how to meet that need, and many more. This has been Accessible Instructional Materials in Simple Language, brought to you by the Pacer Center, in collaboration with the National Center on Accessible Instructional Materials, where help is always available.
Okay, so we're going to be talking a little bit more about many of these resources that were mentioned. So, unfortunately, the printed textbooks that we have in the classroom are not useful to many students. They are not useful to the students in general education whose decoding abilities are well below grade level, and they are not useful to those students who are identified as special educational 504 who have the similar type issues. The very materials that are supposed to support learning can actually create barriers to learning. Basically, if the students are not able to gain or use information in typical textbooks, they do not have access then to the educational content that we saw on the video, nor are they able to meet the expected high level of achievement to which all students are held. These students required another way to gain information that is needed to participate and achieve in the general curriculum. For many students, this need can be addressed by providing the students with an identical or somewhat modified information in one or more of these specialized format that you have on the right of the screen, whether it is a digital text, large print, audio, Braille, or more likely a combination of some of the above. When specialized format and support for use are well matched to a student's individual needs and abilities, and when you combine that with effective instruction in reading, this is going to be the difference between exclusion and achievement across the curriculum. So, where are these specialized support to be found? Where can a school district go to locate such critical support? And we're going to see that in the next slide. So you have two terms there. They are both pronounced about the same. The difference, one ends with a C like in cat, and one in S like in Sam. So IDEA, the Individual Disability Education Act of 2004, established a center that's called the National Instructional Material Access Center, NIMAS, to serve as a national repository, as a clearinghouse for electronic files. And these are basically NIMAS. These are the NIMAS files. So if we look at the second term, the National Instructional Material Accessibility Standards, NIMAS with S, these are source file, electronic files from publishers of K-12 textbooks and related printed materials. So let's see, how does the center work? The center receives NIMAS with S, the electronic file set from publisher, and catalog these files and makes them available for download. These electronic files sets are then converted into student-ready specialized formats such as digital text, large print, audio, or braille. In other words, a publisher who sells a textbook to a school district now is also required to make available an electronic version of that to NIMAS. And NIMAS then, through their process, can convert that to either a digital text, large print, audio file, or braille. And this is huge because that's one of the things that can happen now that technology has improved to such an extent. So what happens in Wisconsin? DPI Bulletin 13.02 on legal requirement of AIM in Wisconsin. It basically says that all school districts must send to DPI an assurance form stating that their students who are blind or visually impaired, including those with other print disabilities, will receive the material in an appropriate format, that is the one that best match for the student needs, and in a time manner, meaning the same time as their peers will receive it in the regular classroom. Now, I just want to point out the language, and let me repeat that one more time. An assurance stating the students who are blind or visually impaired, including those with other print disabilities. This language, way back in 2004, identified visually impaired as and Braille as the key element. What we have seen over the last 2 or 3 years, as we are receiving more information from OSEP, from the U.S. Department of Education about dyslexia, it seems to be a effort to concentrate more now on students that have accessibility difficulties with a printed page who are not blind but who are learning disabled. And I predict that within 3, 4, 5 years, we'll see a lot more students in the regular classroom who are not blind who need material for NIMAS. So DPI strongly recommends the district coordinate with NIMAS to ensure delivery of print materials in a timely manner. If a district chooses not to coordinate with NIMAS, with a center, the district then must submit with its assurances form a plan of action to comply with NIMAS. In other words, you don't have to obtain it as a school district. You don't have to get it from NIMAS, but you got to get it from somewhere that with the same standard and quality as the material at NIMAS. Students with print disabilities will receive their textbook and core material in a specialized format at the same time as students without print disabilities. In addition, and this is where it's very interesting, in addition, it is the responsibility of the local school district to ensure that children with disability who need those kind of format but are not under the definition of blind or other person with print disabilities, and if these students need the materials, that cannot be produced from NIMS because NIMS files are only for students identified as blind, visually impaired, or print disabilities, these students must receive instructional material in a timely manner. So this is huge. That sets up the bar and much higher for local school districts to ensure that any student that the team identifies the need for any one of those alternative formats, the district must provide it. Regardless if it fits the NIMS criteria, then they have to obtain it from another source. So let's concentrate a little bit more in terms of what are, I mentioned a number of times the alternative format. Let's talk a little bit more about them. The first one, digital. What is digital text? Digital text is delivered on a computer or another device like an iPad to meet the needs of students with learning sensory or physical disability. Digital text is malleable. It's flexible, and depending on the technology and the software that is used, various features that control how the content is presented to the user can be manipulated in such ways as changing the font size, changing the font type, changing the font's color, changing the background color, and any other contrast to accommodate the needs of the learner. Supporting reading software with text-to-speech is very powerful, and we have seen it grow over the last few years. And if you remember, I mentioned a couple of minutes ago about my prediction that we're going to see a lot more use of technology now that it's available in text-to-speech that will help many students who are not necessarily just blind, but also have reading difficulties. Because now the software, the text-to-speech, can provide audio and visual component either separately or simultaneously. The software allows us to control the type of voice, if it's a male or female, the speed of the voice, navigation, going back and forth, jumping to page number, chapter, as well as scaffold support like find or search option, bookmarking, note-taking, text highlighter, generation of a outline from the highlighted text, audio notes, dictionary, thesaurus, links to multimedia, the speech-to-text or text-to-speech, all of these options provide also the use of electronics and hyperlinks on the web to different dictionaries, thesaurus, more explanation about the text itself. When digital text is delivered in an accessible technology, it can be benefit to students with many different type of needs. Those with reading and learning disabilities often benefits from the use of supported reading software. Students with physical disabilities are able to access the content using various assistive technologies, and students who are visually impaired or blind may need the digital text content delivered via a computer as in a large text on a screen or as a refreshable braille. And we'll talk a little bit more about refreshable braille in a minute. New technology combined with digital text makes audio-supported reading, and it's called ASR, possible, enables students with visual impairment to listen to voice text while looking at the screen displays the print or using a refreshable braille device. So they have the choice of either looking at the screen that has the print or preferably feeling the refreshable braille device and actually getting this information simultaneously with the audio. With sufficient practice, both braille readers and magnified print readers can greatly increase the rate in which they obtain information from text using ASR. This method also holds great promise for other students with reading and learning disabilities. I wanted to share with you, again, it's a few minutes video of a teacher who became involved in the study of universal design for learning, and that have suggested to him to combine text to speech to allow a student with dyslexia to benefit from that mode. I think it will be an interesting video, so we'll do it right now.
UDL is not about making work easier or lowering standards. Text-to-speech leveled the playing field in John Mundorf's classroom.
After learning about universal design the first summer, I came back to my classroom, and after I felt really comfortable about 3 principles of universal design, I wanted to start with something really specific. And that year I had a student in my classroom who previously in school attended school frequently, so he wasn't an attendance problem, not a behavior problem at all, an engaged student that wanted to learn. But the student really struggled with reading, and it ended up that he's profoundly dyslexic. And came into my classroom and, excited about starting the new school year, but really down though about his ability to read. And so we talked and got to know each other, and I looked at his records, and we kind of established that this is probably what was going on. And so we talked a little bit about this idea of dyslexia, and he said, well, I didn't know what's dyslexia. So I'm sure at some point someone might have mentioned it to him along the way, but here's this boy that thought, that he just wasn't good at school when it's, something totally beyond his control. So what I found, though, was that his schooling up to that point, while, the teachers had, well-intentioned and gave him a lot of different experiences, it still was very text-focused in the traditional sense. So as students were reading books on level, he was still reading books at a much lower level that to help him with that decoding. And not that that's not important, but he was missing out on really rich content. And what I found when he came into my classroom was he was lacking a lot of background knowledge on topics, especially in math, science, and social studies. And so my first attempt to provide multiple means of representation to my students came through the idea of using text-to-speech. I wanted to take the text, the traditional text, and I wanted to find it in a digital format. And so I contacted our district office, and I asked the folks in assistive technology. I contacted the heads of the departments, and I found that all of our textbooks all had digital versions that I could access. And then I also found out that our school district had a text-to-speech program on the computers that was a universal program on every computer, but it wasn't, people didn't know about it. So I learned more about using that, and I learned about the digital materials. And so that meant that when we were in a science or a social studies class or a math class, that the student was able to participate without a full-time inclusion teacher sitting by his side reading everything to him. So he would, we'd be in a science class, and we'd be working on lesson 1 and gathering content and reading. And he'd go back to the computer, and he would listen, and he would then come back and be able to participate in the group. But then a really interesting thing happened was that kids started to say, well, what's going on? Why is he going to the computer? And so then I said, well, this is a program that's being used. It's an electronic book, and then we also have this text-to-speech program. And so then some other kids said, well, can I try it? I said, well, sure, you can try it. And then what I found, it wasn't just the kids that had struggled with reading. It might have been a student that, wanted to read more, wanted to read at a higher level, already understood the content we were learning about in class, but wanted to do something, more enriched or advanced. So, would get out go to National Geographic's website, which is written at a much higher level than a 4th grade level, but using the text-to-speech, he would listen and be able to understand it. And so what I found was in making the accommodation for the student in the margins, the student that had been left behind, all of my other students benefited as a result. So it wasn't just, an individual accommodation, a specific, assistive technology accommodation. Although it started as that, it grew though into a universal design. design idea of everybody has access to it, and people are going to use it for different reasons, whether it be they want to read something more challenging, they're having a hard time reading the text, maybe they just prefer to read on the computer, maybe they like the note-taking options in the digital version as opposed to paper and pencil. It doesn't matter. The point was, though, they had the option, and they were able to make that choice. And then once people started making choices, we would talk about, well, why did you make that choice? Was that a good choice for you? But what happened, though, was it allowed everybody to participate. There was no lowering of standards. You know, this boy was doing on-grade level work with us, and I wasn't assessing his ability to decode the words on the page. So I didn't want that to get in the way of him learning science or social studies or math. And it was funny because there was a day where, because of that, though, he now had access. He had this learned behavior of, well, I can just say I don't know how to read it, and then I can get out of doing it. Well, he didn't have that option anymore. And so there was a great moment where we play a review game in my class. We play a review basketball game. So when we learn about math, when we're getting ready for a test, we'll play just a basketball game where we ask questions and they get it right to shoot a basket. And so this boy came in and he hadn't completed his work to be able to play the game. And he played the card of why I couldn't read it. I said, well, you have this tool here, you have this tool here, you made a bad choice. So it was no longer an academic problem, it was a behavioral problem. So the vision in my head that I'll never forget was, we're getting ready to play the game, and here's this boy who forever would have been allowed to play because he just said, I can't read it, had to walk back to the computer, flip open the scanner, put down his book, and do the work back there, just grumping along. And he wasn't happy about it, probably not a highlight in his life. But for me, I realized he's being treated like every other fourth grader at this point. He's not being singled out because of his dyslexia or his struggles with reading. He's now being treated like everybody else, and that's the whole point. You know, universal design for learning doesn't mean everybody gets straight A's. It means that everybody has access and opportunity to get those good grades and those good marks and to learn. But it doesn't mean that everybody passes with flying colors. It's not a lowering of standards. It's not making school easier for people. It's providing access to appropriate goals and standards for each and every student.
So we're going to be covering a little bit more about UDL in a few minutes, but I thought it would be worthwhile to hear John Mundroff talk about his experience. So the next format is large print. So the large print format provides the same content as a standard print, only in larger font to help those with visual difficulties read more easily. Large print can refer to actual paper that has the bigger letters, or it could be referred to as large text, which would be then on a computer. Large print generally defined as print that is somewhere in the font size of 8 to 12, and some people use the guideline of defining large print as 18, font 18 or higher. Large print refers to hard copy paper that may be printed on pages that are the same size as the standard text page or on pages of a larger size. When textbooks are printed on a larger size paper, the book look heavy and bulky and difficult to carry for kids. However, many current large print textbooks are produced in a page size more typical for all other textbooks. So depending on the number of pages, they can be more portable and student-friendly. For example, in the early grades, print educational materials are generally provided in a larger font size and also on a larger print size, which can be sufficient for the student access. There may be some factors that are create problems when you are looking on a larger font size on a computer. For example, the contrast, clutter, spacing or print presentation of a text may affect the student ability to read efficiently. I want to show you there is a software called Readability, and I want to show you a picture. Let me just open that, and you'll see on the right, there is a page from a Milwaukee Journal about a baseball player and his struggles. And on the left is what happened when I applied readability software to that. It removes all the clutter. And as you can see, by able to control, I'm using a Mac, so I press the Command plus, and I can get bigger or smaller, depending on how I control. So you can allow students to access information by removing the clutter and still seeing a bigger size font. Let me just close that. So also, we need to say that also some magnification devices and tools are available that some students prefer to use them as well. Let's talk about audio. The audio format that provides speech to which the student listen. The audio format may be recorded, either could be a human voice, human speech, or synthesized electronic speech. There are many ways in which speech output can be adjusted depending on the technology, the software used. For example, they can be changes in pitch, volume, the speed in which the speech is presented. Other features in audio files, such as navigation, are extremely important so that the user can go back and forth, jump to different page number, chapter, and so on. Students who have difficulties with reading text or who spend a great deal of time trying to decode text or who are blind or visually impaired may benefit from the use of the auditory text. When content is presented auditorily, it can reduce the cognitive load of trying to read text or braille and can focus on comprehension of the information. Decisions are made based on the student's needs, the environment in which the tasks are completed, and the nature of the task the students need to accomplish. For example, students who use braille may prefer using the audio format in different settings where they cannot easily use braille books or have technology available to use the refreshable braille or text-to-speech or enlarged text on a computer screen. Human speech may be a personal preference or it may be preferred for specific subject matters. I want to show you the same article that we saw from the Milwaukee Journal, what happened when you were attaching it to an audio file. So here we go, and we'll just listen for just a couple of minutes. So this is the same article that we saw before in the previous picture.
The Journal Sentinel. Updated. Yesterday, 11:58 p.m. Manager Craig Counsell installed Jaime Peralta as the Milwaukee Brewers opening day starter, believing he'd rediscover the confidence he pitched with in 2014. After 2 outings, all that's been evident is more frustration. Colby Rasmus homered twice and Tyler White added a third as Brett.
Okay, so I think you get the idea. We're not going to go too much in it, but this is the software that allows us to attach an audio file to any website, article, page, PDF file that would then ease the burden on students who need that audio support in addition to the visual visual item. So what is Braille? So Braille is a tactical system of reading and writing made up of raised dot patterns for letters, numbers, and punctuation marks. This format is used almost exclusively by people who are blind or whose eyesight is not sufficient for reading the printed material. Braille may be either embossed, that's a permanent printed document, just like a book. Can't change it. Once it's there, once it's embossed, it's there. Or refreshable, this is where the latest electronics allows us to do that. So it's almost like a computer by getting this information, you're getting new information continuously. The process of learning to read in Braille is similar to learning to read and write print. People typically use fingers of both hands to read from left to right over a line of Braille using very little pressure with their fingers to touch the Braille dots. The tactical perception and discrimination skills are important for efficient Braille reading. An IEP team can determine if Braille is appropriate for a student with visual impairment. This process includes information, that is, the IEP team has to obtain information from a variety of sources, such as the clinical low vision evaluation, a functional vision assessment, learning media assessment, the student progress in the educational program. The IEP team analyzes and considers this information in a variety of contexts, including the student's current need as well as future needs, before determining that Braille might be a primary learning medium. Students who use Braille may also need other specialized format for different subject or content. So, and we sort of talked a little bit about it before. Why AEM? First of all, it's the law. The IDA, Chapter 115, as well as IDA, the federal law, regulation required that schools ensure that accessible format of textbook and related core instructional materials are provided to students with disability who need such material, and most important, in a timely manner. That is the same time that's available for their peers. The second reason, and you can see on the slide that the law portion. The second one is because of UDL. Brain research over the past 40 years suggests that there is a huge variability in how students learn. And that brings us to the subject of UDL. And I think you already heard John Mandroff talk a little bit about UDL as part of what he was doing with text-to-speech or speech-to-text. First of all, the term Universal Design for Learning means it's a scientifically valid framework for guiding educational practice in providing flexibility in the way information is presented to students. So right there, you can see how UDL is aligned with AEM. UDL says that students do not learn the same way. 40 years of brain research pointed out that the way students learn is unique to them as their DNA or fingerprints. So if we ask all students to access a printed page, some will be very successful, but for some, it will be a barrier. So what AEM suggests is that we should consider each student's unique needs and find the best match for that student. And that's essentially what UDL is saying as well. This is actually one of my favorite cartoons describing UDL. So on the left side, you have this kid in a wheelchair that says to the janitor who's shoveling the snow, which could have been the month of May in Wisconsin, which I believe it was. So the student asks, could you please shovel the ramp? To which the janitor says, all these other kids are waiting to use the stairs. When I get through shoveling them off, then I will clear the ramp for you. To which the kid in the wheelchair responds, but if you shovel the ramp, we can all get in. And this is the essence of Universal Design for Learning. Let's see, what does it mean in terms of learning? So let's say instead of the ramp, you have a ramp on the left and you have stairs on the right. So on the steps on the right, this will be equivalent to an English teacher that requires the class to read pages 14 to 21 and write answer to 3 questions on an 8x11 sheet of paper. The ramp on the left is equivalent to a teacher who provides a digital version of the pages 14 to 21 and allow students to demonstrate what they have learned in multiple ways that reflect their preferred mode of action. So that is the essence of UDL as well as AEM. So we also talked about how are decisions made about AEM and who makes them. So the most effective way to consider AEM is through the IEP process, where parents and staff are equal partners in coming up with an effective IEP document. So in the process of determining AEM, number one, they need to establish the need for AEM. There's a need, establish the need for instructional material in a specialized format. Then we need to select the specialized format that's needed by the student to access the curriculum, one of the four: digital, large print, audio, braille, and then acquiring the needed format in a timely manner, and determining the supports needed for effective use for educational participation and achievement. So establishing the need would be if a student is able, so the IEP team then needs to consider if a student is able to understand the content that's presented in textbook but is unable to read or use them, then the student will need another way to obtain the information contained in the printed material. This is important, so let me repeat it one more time. What the IEP team has to consider that if a student is able to understand content presented in textbook but is unable to read or use them, the student will need another way to obtain the information. Very much like in the video that we saw of the teacher, John Mondroff, and the dyslexic kid. Obviously, once the student had access to the information via the text-to-speech, he was able to participate in classroom discussion. So he was able to understand and interact and participate in the classroom. And that's a criteria for ability to, then the need of an IEP team to identify which of the AEM option will be best for the student. So then subsequently, the number two is selection. How are AEM selected? The team determined then which specialized format will be most useful for the student, and more than one may be needed at a time. So where to acquire? Keep in mind that many students may need more than one specialized format and may need material from more than one source. So there are several basic sources that include the following. One is NIMAS that we talked earlier, the National Repository for the source file. And these are files that are free for special education, for IDEA, for special education students who are either blind or have print disability. There are also commercial sources. Some instructional material can be purchased in accessible format from different publishers. And there are also free sources. There are some materials available free of charge from various sources, and I want to show you let me see. Oops. Let me go back here. Sorry. And there are and that's, I just meant to click here. There we go. So this will take us to, oops. I wanted to make this bigger. There we go. So this is a site where these are free materials. So let's say you wanted to look at some math tools, and you click on that, and it gives you a ton of software that the student could use. The teacher can work with the student on that. There are study skill tools, research tools, audiobooks, writing tools, text-to-speech, collaborative tools, additional free tools, useful tools. There's a ton of them. And there are many resources that provides them. In terms of what support's needed for effective use, it is very smart to plan and to provide training, whether it's training for the staff with the new software, with the new strategies, training for the student, thinking about what accommodations may be needed, and so on. I want to share here, I wanted to share with you two links to something called, one is called the AEM Navigator. It is the Navigator is a tool that facilitates the process of decision making around specialized format. It's a very formal structure that IP teams become familiar with and use in helping them determine what support different students need, learning disability, visually impaired, have difficulties with perceptual issues on the page, and so on. It is a, let me just open it here. There we go. Now, of course, I can show you, you can make it bigger, or I should say you can make it bigger here. And it's a Word document that has a lot of information available for IP teams to review and plan, parents to read and become familiar with what will take place at an IP meeting, determining the needs, step one, and then it goes through that. So it's a very easy read and very functionable and practical tool. Now there is another tool I want to show you, which is called the AIM Explorer. The AIM Explorer is right here, and I'll tell you in a minute what it is. It's a simulation tool. It's a simulation tool. Oh, that's not what I wanted. There we go. It's a simulation tool where students can try out features found in reading software like magnification, text, background color, layout option. Try out and decide which setting works best for them. I'll make it a little bit bigger. Again, on the Apple, I use the Command Plus, so I can make this bigger. And you can see what this tool allows teachers to do to select different features for different students. Say you want to enlarge the text by 1.5, 2, 3 times. Change the color of a text and background. Because some students do better when you have a different color background. It seems to be, text appears clearer and less distracting. Highlighting the text while reading without hearing it read, changing the layout. So these are all options, and you select those, and then you go through a process where the student is trying to access this information with these changes, and you alter that a number of times until you finally, as a IP team, identify the right format that best meets the student needs in ability to access the reading program. So what I have done here, and we said that at the end we'll conclude with a number of items, and we can also leave some time for questions. But what it is that I selected from the various literature frequently asked questions by parents regarding AEM. So I thought I would share those with you. So for example, not sure if we need to spend a lot of time with that, because I think for the most part we have covered so many of these items throughout the presentation. But here's a question. My child is struggling to read print instruction material. What should I do? So obviously a good place to start, which is pretty obvious, is to talk to the teacher about the concern and to see whether the child having difficulties reading would accessible education material may be needed. The school may suggest these materials, or you may want, as a parent, may want to start a discussion about your child's need for AEM in the school. So if your child is not already receiving special education, you may also want to consider requesting a special ed evaluation. After your child has been evaluated, then the IEP team will meet to determine whether your child qualifies for special ed, and students may also be identified as needing accessible education material by IEP teams based on disability. They're talking about IDA, 504, ADA, and so on. Just a note of caution, NIMS material are only available for special education students. So if a student has a 504 and a 504 plan, or just a regular education student whose needs did not rise the level of a special ed or 504, but still has difficulties reading, the team has to consider whether the 504 team or the building accommodation plan, they all have to look at, would that kind of accommodation, the kind of support through AEM, a digital text, an audio, a support to a larger print, will that help the student do better? And they can use the AIM Explorer that we saw before to gauge and to make different changes in different contexts to see what works best. And if that's the case, then it is the school district responsibility to provide that to the student, whether the student is regular ed, 504, or special ed. What are accessible education material? We certainly talked a little bit about that. What legal issues are important to know about in relation to AEM? Well, we mentioned the fact that the law requires that district ensure timely provision of AIM, and that means at the same time as peers. So we don't want to wait our kids to wait too long before they access the material, because then everybody else moves forward and then we're left behind. So it's got to be done in a very timely fashion. What are some indicators that my child may need AEM? And again, we talked about it. You and other member of your child IEP team will then review information from the child file, including evaluation results, to determine whether the child needs AEM. There are a number of questions that, when explored by the team, could indicate that the student may need it. For example, and we certainly talked about it before, does your child have difficulties reading grade level material across all environments? But is he able to understand the text when it's read aloud, but unable to read his or her on their own? And that really is the key. If he has difficulties reading, does he understand when it's read to him? And again, that goes to John Mandroff's example of the kid in the video that we saw before, and I'm hoping this will highlight for you the need to look at that. Because when students have difficulties reading but can comprehend the material if read to them or said, explained to them, then there has to be another medium for them to reach the material. And that's where the digital text and the other audio formats come to play. What are some indicators that my child, I think we covered that. Yeah, let's move on to the next slide. How can I collaborate with my child's school to make decision about AEM? And I think the best thing to do is to, for both the school and the the parent to access that the two documents that we mentioned before, the AIM Navigator, which provides a written documentation of a process of how the IEP team identifies needs of students for such material, and the Explorer, the simulation that allows the teacher to modify different features, allowing the student to experiment and find which is the best features that maximize the kid's ability to read. And we'll conclude with the last one is that how can I learn about AM in Wisconsin? And there is a link that I want to share with you. It's Wisconsin Accessible Media Production. It talks a little bit about many of the things that we talked about. It's on the DPI website. The website is wamp.k12.wi.us. What I will do is that I will prepare a resource page that I will send to Bonnie, and Bonnie, if you're kind enough to send it to the group. And
I will be glad to.
So I think that comes into the end. Are there any questions that I could attempt to answer?
Are there any other questions for Nissan at this time? At this time, Nissan, we don't have any written questions that are in our question box. We'll just pause for a second here and see if anyone has any others. As I said before, I'll be glad to send out that information sheet that you will be putting together to the people who have signed up for our webinar today. Nissan, do you have any parting?
No.
Just hang on one second. I just got a question. Are there resources similar for colleges?
That's a very, very good question. I will pull together some materials and make it available to you, Bonnie, and you can send it to the group as well.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, and thank you for our person who just posted that question, because I think that there'll be additional people who are interested in that information. So anything else that you'd like to say at this time, Nissan?
No, thank you very much for the opportunity to share this information, and again, the resources I will send you will allow those participants to access some good Wisconsin information as well as national information on that.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your presentation today, as I know that all those that were listening also got a lot out of the presentation and learned lots of new information. At this time, this concludes our webinar. We'd like to thank you for joining us today. We have over 100 scheduled trainings and webinars for 2016, so please check the Wisconsin Facet's website calendar and register for any upcoming trainings. And please watch for the short evaluation that will be coming your way immediately following our webinar today. To all of you, thank you and have a great day. And to Nissan, thank you again for your expertise and your presentation today. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.